At first glance, the Bible is full of stories that seem to make no sense. But if the Bible was truly inspired by God, then nothing, absolutely nothing, is a coincidence. Most people know these stories from Sunday school, but almost no one knows the truth hidden beneath them. They see a collection of ancient folklore, but they miss the red thread, a divine, invisible, and eternal red thread that ties absolutely everything together. It is a celestial puzzle where the Ark of the Covenant is connected to the Virgin Mary, where the sacrifice of Isaac is linked to the crucifixion of Jesus, and where Jesus' cross is mirrored in Moses' bronze serpent. In the Bible, everything is connected. But here is the central paradox that should haunt you. Why would a God of order use such mysterious symbols? Why hide the most profound truths in shadows and ancient types? Get ready, because what you are about to discover today is known by very few, and it will make you see the Word of God with completely new eyes. We are going to unveil the most incredible, long-forgotten connections that have remained unanswered for thousands of years. This is not just history. It is a revelation. It is a promise of restoration for your soul. Today, we decode the mystery that has been waiting beneath the surface for you to find it. If you have ever felt that God was silent in your deepest pain, or that the scriptures were just dusty relics of the past, this message is for you. Stand with the truth. Open your heart. Because when these divine threads finally come together, they always point to one place. Consider the mystery of Jacob's ladder. For centuries, people believed that this famous dream of a ladder connecting heaven and earth was about human effort. They thought it was a message that we must climb step by step through our own strength to reach the divine. But they were wrong. That ladder was not an object to be climbed. It was a living symbol of something infinitely more powerful. The story begins at a breaking point, in the deepest darkness of the wilderness, where a man collapses in exhaustion, only to see the impossible. And what about the Ark of the Covenant? We have been obsessed with finding a chest of wood and gold, searching the deserts and caves of the world. But the scriptures left us a hidden treasure map that points to a different kind of ark, a journey to the hill country of Judea, a stay of exactly 3 months, and a child leaping for joy. These are not sentimental details or mere coincidences. They are coded messages from the architect of the universe. Then we look at Mount Moriah, where a father and his beloved son climb toward a sacrifice. Isaac carries the wood on his shoulders, unaware that he is walking into a pattern that would repeat 2,000 years later on a hill called Golgotha. The son asks the most painful question in history: where is the lamb? And the father's answer remains a prophetic thunderclap that echoes through the ages. God will provide the lamb. Every detail, from the confusing languages of Babel to the mysterious bronze serpent in the desert, is part of a divine red thread. This thread ties the ancient law of the kinsman redeemer to the very blood flowing in your veins today. It connects the 6 cities of refuge to your own search for peace. We are about to unveil why these connections matter to your life right now. Why does the Bible spend so much time on legal details about kinsmen, sandals, and high priests? Why are we told about the specific pitch used to seal Noah's Ark? Because these are not just artifacts of a dead religion. They are the keys to your spiritual freedom. The ancient law of redemption was a blueprint for your rescue. The high priest's death in a city of refuge was the signature on your release papers. Every mystery we are about to decode today was placed there by a God who wants to be found. A God who has been communicating with you in a secret language hidden in plain sight. You might have read these stories 100 times and felt they were distant or irrelevant to your modern struggles with stress, fear, or purpose. But the truth is, you are the missing piece in this divine puzzle. The red thread doesn't just connect the ark to Mary or the serpent to the cross. It connects those eternal events to you, here and now. You are not a random observer of these ancient texts. You are the one for whom the ladder was lowered. You are the one, the kinsman redeemer, came to find. We are about to step into a world where archaeology meets prophecy, and where original Hebrew and Greek words open doors that have been locked for centuries. We will uncover why the Ark was never truly lost, and why the confusion of Babel was reversed in a single afternoon. This is the hour of revelation. This is the moment your eyes will be opened to the staggering precision of the divine mind. Do not look away. Do not miss the moment where the shadow becomes reality. Prepare yourself, for the truth is far more beautiful and far more personal than you ever imagined. Today, the deep calls to the deep. Today, we finally unveil the master plan to truly grasp the magnitude of these divine connections. We must first strip away our modern perspective and step into the dust of the ancient Near East. Imagine a world where every name, every direction, and every natural element was pregnant with spiritual weight. This is the world of the patriarchs and the prophets, a world where the physical and the supernatural were not two separate realms, but a single, interwoven reality. In this era, God was not just a distant concept. He was the architect of a grand legal and symbolic system that was being meticulously built, piece by piece, across thousands of years of human history. Archaeologists today dig through layers of sediment to find remains of ancient altars and city gates. But the most profound discoveries are not found in stone. They are found in the structures of the ancient languages themselves. In the Hebrew mind, a word was more than a label. It was an essence. When we look at the historical context of the wilderness wanderings or the royal courts of Jerusalem, we see a people living within a master script they did not yet fully understand. They were the actors in a cosmic drama, performing rituals and building structures that served as shadows of a greater light yet to come. Take, for example, the political and religious atmosphere of the ancient Levant. The laws given to Moses were not merely for social order. They were revolutionary declarations of a new kind of kingdom. The tabernacle, with its precise measurements and specific materials, was a physical manifestation of a celestial pattern. Every piece of acacia wood, every thread of scarlet wool, and every drop of anointing oil was a prophetic whisper. We must understand this foundation, this rigid, sacred framework of the law, to appreciate the shock of how these shadows would eventually be transformed into the living reality of the gospel. The true depth of this context is revealed when we peel back the layers of translation to find the original Hebrew roots. Consider the construction of Noah's Ark, a vessel designed to survive the ultimate judgment. God commanded Noah to coat it with pitch, or gopher. To a modern reader, this is merely a waterproof sealant, but to the ancient ear, this word carried a staggering weight. Gopher is the same root used for atonement and ransom. This linguistic bridge tells us that the ark did not just float because of wood and tar. It floated because it was covered by a ransom. The historical context of the flood is transformed from a catastrophic event into a legal masterpiece of preservation. As we move forward into the era of the law, we encounter the cities of refuge. These were not merely sanctuaries for the accused. They were physical manifestations of a divine paradox. In the ancient world, justice was swift and often bloody, driven by the avenger of blood. Yet, God established a system where a man's life was tied to the life of the high priest. The historical reality was that as long as the high priest lived, the fugitive remained a prisoner within the walls of refuge. Only upon the death of the high priest could the debt be wiped clean and the exile return home. This was the atmosphere in which the prophets walked, a landscape where every legal statute and every architectural detail was a shadow waiting for its substance. Archaeology shows us the remains of these cities, but the context reveals a spiritual architecture. We are looking at a world that was being prepared through language and law to recognize a Redeemer who would fulfill every gopher and serve as the final high priest. This is the foundation we must stand upon as we prepare to see these ancient shadows come to life in the stories that follow. Beyond the linguistic codes, we must examine the physical reality of the Levant during the Bronze and Iron Ages. The world into which the law was spoken was a landscape of absolute monarchs and brutal deities. Yet, in the middle of this chaos, a different kind of architecture began to emerge, a sacred geography. When we look at the ruins of ancient tabernacles or the foundation stones of Jerusalem, we are not just looking at debris. We are looking at a divine footprint. The context of the era tells us that Israel was being set apart, not just by their beliefs, but by the very space they occupied. Every boundary line drawn in the desert was a sentence in a much larger story. This historical backdrop is essential to understanding the tension of the biblical narrative. The people were living in a constant state of holy expectancy. They were surrounded by symbols. They could see the smoke of the altar, the heavy veils of the sanctuary, the white robes of the priesthood, but the true meaning was still veiled. Archaeology confirms that the craftsmanship of these items was intentional, mirroring celestial concepts that were far beyond the technological reach of the time. This contrast between the humble materials of the earth and the majestic patterns of heaven created a spiritual gravity that drew the ancient world toward a single point of revelation. It was a time of shadows, where a simple wooden chest could represent the throne of the Almighty, and a specific ritual could stay the hand of judgment. To the modern skeptic, these might seem like primitive superstitions, but the context reveals a sophisticated educational system. God was using the physical world as a classroom, teaching a rebellious humanity about holiness, justice, and the desperate need for a bridge. As we dig deeper into the soil of the Holy Land, we find that the rocks themselves seem to cry out, testifying to a master plan that was already in motion long before the first stone of the temple was ever laid. Beyond the physical ruins, we must understand the spiritual climate of the ancient Near East. The cultures surrounding Israel were dominated by gods of caprice and fear, deities who demanded blood without reason and offered no hope beyond the grave. Into this darkness, the God of the Bible spoke a language of absolute precision. He was not just giving a moral code, he was establishing a legal framework for a cosmic rescue. When we study the historical records of the Levant, we see that the laws of Israel were intentionally distinct. They were designed to create a holy expectancy in the hearts of a people who were being trained to look for a specific kind of deliverer. The context of the era reveals that every social interaction and every religious festival was a rehearsal. The Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, and the intricate rituals of the priesthood were not static traditions. They were dynamic, living prophecies. Archaeology shows that the Israelites carried these traditions through centuries of exile and war, treating them as a sacred map. Why? Because the context of their suffering taught them that their survival depended on the integrity of this map. They understood that these shadows were connected to a reality that could hold the weight of their souls. This historical tension, the long wait for the substance to arrive, is the very air that the biblical writers breathed. Every detail we uncover, from the limestone altars of the Galilee to the royal seals of the House of David, confirms that the world was being meticulously prepared. There was a political, social, and linguistic infrastructure being built across the generations. This was the fullness of time, a historical moment where every road, every law, and every prophecy had converged into a single, focused point of light. To miss this context is to miss the heartbeat of the gospel. We are looking at a world that was primed for a revolution, waiting for the moment when the ancient shadows would finally be eclipsed by the radiant presence of the Son of Man. The transition from spiritual theory to historical reality begins beneath the layers of limestone and sand in the Holy Land. For centuries, skeptics argued that the stories of the patriarchs and the early priesthood were mere myths, but archaeology has begun to breathe life into these ancient records. Consider the monumental discovery of the Siloam inscription, or the Tel Dan stele, which provide concrete evidence of the Davidic dynasty and the socio-political climate described in the texts. These are not just artifacts. They are silent witnesses to a world that functioned exactly as the Bible portrays. When we examine the remains of ancient Israelite dwellings, or the distinct pottery of the wilderness period, We see a people who were defined by a sacred architecture that stood in stark contrast to the pagan empires surrounding them. One of the most compelling archaeological frames involves the specific design of the ancient tabernacle and the later temple. Excavations across the Levant have revealed that the measurements and the orientation of these sacred spaces were unique. They were built to house a presence that the ancient world found terrifyingly holy. In the ruins of Arad and Shiloh, archaeologists have uncovered altars and vessels that match the biblical descriptions with staggering precision. This physical evidence serves as an anchor for our faith, showing that the context of the law was built on solid ground. The use of specific materials like acacia wood and pure gold was not a matter of aesthetic choice, but a requirement of a celestial blueprint that was physically manifested in the desert. Furthermore, the discovery of ancient scrolls and inscriptions has shed light on the evolution of the Hebrew script itself. We now know that the language used by the prophets was a living, breathing tool of revelation, designed to carry the weight of eternal truths. This archaeological context proves that the Bible is not a disjointed collection of fables, but a meticulously preserved account of God's interaction with humanity through time and space. The historical credibility of the biblical record is further cemented when we examine the specific customs of the ancient Near Eastern world. Historical documents from contemporary civilizations, such as the Hittites and the Babylonians, reveal legal structures and covenant formats that mirror the Mosaic Law with startling accuracy. For example, the structure of the suzerain vassal treaties found in archaeological archives provides a perfect historical template for the covenant at Sinai. This context shows us that God was not speaking in a vacuum. He was using the established legal language of the time to communicate eternal truths. When we find ancient seals or bullae bearing the names of officials mentioned in the scriptures, the context shifts from religious tradition to verifiable history. These physical imprints prove that the people who walked these paths and enforced these laws were as real as the stones they built with. In addition to physical artifacts, the use of original language remains our most precise archaeological tool. In the New Testament, the Greek word episkiazo, translated as overshadow, carries a heavy historical and theological link back to the Hebrew Shekinah. This is the same word used in the Septuagint to describe the cloud of glory resting upon the tabernacle. Archaeologists and historians note that this linguistic continuity is not accidental. It serves as a bridge between the physical structure of the Old Testament sanctuary and the biological reality of the New Testament revelation. Every time we uncover a fragment of a scroll or a carved inscription in the ruins of a synagogue, we are finding another piece of this linguistic map. This archaeological and historical context tells us that the Bible is a record of God entering human history at specific coordinates. The ruins of the cities of refuge or the ancient threshing floors in Bethlehem are not just tourist sites. They are the stages where the drama of redemption was physically performed. As we look at the evidence, we see a world that was being meticulously prepared through every treaty, every building project, and every legal decree. This foundation of solid fact allows us to move forward into the narrative, knowing that the shadows we are about to decode were cast by a very real and very historical light. But after examining the stones of the temple and the ancient legal codes of the Levant, a much deeper and more unsettling question remains. If these structures and laws were so precise, why does the history of Israel seem so chaotic? Why would a God of absolute order choose to hide his most vital secrets in the middle of blood-stained fields and family betrayals? We see the ruins of the cities of refuge, but we must ask, what was the true cost of a man's freedom? Is it possible that the death of a single high priest was never just about a legal release, but was pointing to a debt so massive that it required a celestial payment? We have uncovered the linguistic root of Kofar on Noah's boat, but a mystery still hangs in the air. Why was the ransom applied to a wooden vessel and not directly to the souls inside? There is one detail, one specific, hidden detail that changes everything we think we know about the ancient world. As we look at the life of Jacob, we must wonder why a man of such character flaws was chosen to witness the bridge between worlds. Why did the angels choose that specific, lonely moment to ascend and descend? The archaeology shows us where they stood, and the history tells us what they did, but it does not tell us why. We are standing on the threshold of a revelation that bridges the gap between the physical evidence and the spiritual reality. There is a pattern beneath the surface, a hidden design that most people have overlooked for centuries. What if the greatest mystery of the Bible isn't found in what was written, but in what was shadowed? Prepare yourself, for as we transition from the context to the narrative, we are about to face the question that will unlock the rest of this journey. The deeper we dig into the historical records of the Bible, the more we realize that we are not looking at a series of random events, but a deliberate, celestial architecture. Why did God choose a bronze serpent, the very image of the curse, to be the instrument of healing for a dying nation? Why was the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred throne on earth, described with the same linguistic markers as a young virgin in the hills of Galilee? These questions are not meant to confuse us, but to pull us toward a revelation that has been hidden in plain sight. We see the physical evidence in the dust of the Levant, but we are still missing the heartbeat of the mystery. Is it possible that every ancient ceremony and every drop of sacrificial blood was a precise, coded message for our modern age? Why does the law of the kinsman redeemer require a sandal to be removed to seal a debt? There is a spiritual logic beneath these strange customs, a logic that bridges the gap between the ruins of the past and the crises of your life today. We are standing at the edge of a great discovery, where the shadow finally meets its substance. As we prepare to enter the narrative of the heroes and the fallen, we must ask one final haunting question. If these patterns were meticulously planned over thousands of years, what does that say about the timing of your own life? We are about to witness the stories of Isaac, Ruth, and Jonah, as you have never heard them before, not as old tales, but as the unveiling of a divine master plan. The context is unlocked, the evidence is set, and the questions are laid bare. The time has come to enter the story and watch as the divine red thread finally pulls tight. To truly walk the path of these divine mysteries, we must meet the people whose lives became the very canvas for God's handiwork. These are not merely figures of ancient legend. They are real men and women of flesh and blood, chosen to carry a weight of glory they could barely comprehend. First, we encounter Abraham, the father of nations. He is a man of profound paradox, called the friend of God, yet often driven by a very human fear that led him to stumble in the shadow of his own doubt. Beside him stands Isaac, the son of the promise. Isaac is more than a descendant. He is a silent witness, a man whose strength was found not in his own action, but in his quiet submission to a sacrifice he did not fully understand. Then, we turn our gaze to the barley fields of Bethlehem, where we find Ruth. She is the ultimate outsider, a widow from the cursed land of Moab, arriving in Israel with nothing but a fierce loyalty to her mother-in-law and a desperate hope in a God she has only just begun to know. She is joined by Boaz, a man of standing and integrity. Boaz is the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, whose role is not just to provide, but to legally and spiritually bridge the gap for those who have lost everything. We must also stand on the deck of a storm-tossed ship with Jonah, a prophet who chose the sea over obedience. He is the runaway, the man who tried to flee from the presence of the Almighty, only to find that even the depths of the ocean are within the reach of divine mercy. Each of these characters, the faithful father, the submissive son, the loyal outsider, and the fleeing prophet, represents a different facet of the human condition. They are the primary actors in a cosmic drama, each holding a specific key to the mystery we are decoding. As their stories unfold, you will see that their roles were meticulously cast to reveal a single, overwhelming truth. The deeper we look into the lives of these individuals, the more we realize that they are not isolated figures in history, but interconnected links in a divine chain. Abraham's faith was the foundation, but it was Isaac's silent surrender that gave that faith its prophetic shape. Without the son's willingness to be bound, the father's sacrifice would have remained a mere test of obedience rather than a revelation of the father's heart. Similarly, the arrival of Ruth in the fields of Bethlehem was not a random migration. It was a strategic movement of grace. Her Moabitess blood, once considered a barrier, became the very vessel through which the lineage of the Messiah would flow. This shows us that in God's story, the outsider is often the key to the inside of the mystery. Then there is Boaz, whose character as the kinsman redeemer serves as the bridge between legal requirement and loving kindness. He represents the Goel, the one who is both able and willing to pay a debt that is not his own. His intersection with Ruth is the historical anchor that proves redemption is not an abstract concept, but a physical, legal, and relational reality. Even Jonah, in his rebellion, acts as a mirror to the divine patience. His 3 days in the darkness of the great fish provide the chronological and symbolic template for the ultimate victory over the grave. Each character carries a specific burden of truth, acting as a shadow that points directly to the substance. As we move forward, we must see them as God sees them, not as flawless heroes, but as flawed vessels through whom an infallible plan is being executed. Their struggles, their silences, and their sudden moments of clarity are all meticulously recorded to guide us toward the central revelation. We are not just hearing their stories, we are witnessing the assembly of a divine puzzle. Every step they take on the dusty roads of the ancient world is a step toward the moment when the red thread finally pulls tight, revealing that the faithful father, the submissive son, the loyal outsider, and even the fleeing prophet were all walking toward the same light. The divine drama unfolds in 3 precise acts, beginning at the moment where human logic fails and faith is forced to take its first step into the unknown. We start on the road to Mount Moriah. Act 1 is the setup. A father receives a command that shatters his world, yet he rises before dawn to obey. There is no protest, only the rhythmic sound of footsteps on stone. The tension rises in Act 2, the conflict. Isaac, carrying the very wood that is meant to consume him, looks at the fire and the knife in his father's hands. The silence is heavy with a question that echoes through eternity. Where is the lamb? At this moment, the promise of a nation seems to hang by a single, trembling thread as they reach the summit where the altar waits. Parallel to this, we see Act 1 of Ruth's journey, the bitter setup of loss and starvation in a foreign land. She arrives in Bethlehem not as a hero, but as a beggar, clinging to the edge of survival. The conflict intensifies as she enters the fields of a stranger, working under the scorching sun, hoping only for a few dropped stalks of grain. She is an outsider in a land that remembers her people as enemies. The tension reaches its peak when Naomi instructs her to seek out Boaz in the middle of the night, a move that could lead to redemption or total disgrace. Finally, we witness Jonah's Act 1, the setup of a prophet turning his back on the Almighty. He flees to Tarshish, thinking the sea can hide him from his calling. But the conflict arrives in the form of a great storm that threatens to pull everyone into the abyss. Jonah stands on the deck, knowing the chaos is his own making. He is cast into the deep, falling into the belly of a great fish, a place of absolute darkness where his rebellion meets its limit. These are the moments of maximum pressure, the crucible where the old self must die before the new revelation can be born. The climax of these stories arrives at the very moment when the human spirit is exhausted, and the only path forward is a miracle. On the summit of Moriah, Act 3 begins with the chilling sound of a knife being drawn. Abraham's hand is steady, but his heart is a battlefield. Just as the blade begins its descent, the voice of the angel of the Lord shatters the silence. The turning point is not just the sparing of a son, it is the sudden appearance of a ram caught in the thicket. This is the first great exchange. Isaac is unbound, and the substitute takes his place. The story shifts from a tragedy of loss to a victory of substitution. revealing that the God who provides has a plan that far exceeds the understanding of the patriarch. In the fields of Bethlehem, Ruth's Act 3 unfolds at the threshing floor. In the dead of night, she makes her move of absolute vulnerability, laying at the feet of the kinsman. The turning point here is Boaz's response, not of judgment, but of protective grace. He accepts the role of the Redeemer, moving the story from the poverty of Moab to the royalty of the house of David. The legal debt is settled, the widow is brought into the family, and the outsider becomes the grandmother of a king. The darkness of the barley field is replaced by the dawn of a new lineage. For Jonah, the turning point occurs in the suffocating silence of the deep. Inside the fish, his Act 3 is a prayer of repentance that rises from the roots of the mountains. He recognizes that salvation belongs to the Lord alone. The great fish vomits him onto dry land, a resurrection that serves as a sign for all generations. He is given a second chance, not because he is perfect, but because the mission of mercy is greater than the prophet's fear. As we conclude this retelling, we see that all three stories have reached the same peak. The substitute is found, the debt is paid, and the grave is emptied. We are now standing at the threshold of the deep decoding, where we will finally ask, why did these events happen in this exact way, and what ancient secrets are they hiding from us today? What we have just witnessed is more than a series of dramatic endings. It is the first great shift in the divine narrative, a moment where the impossible becomes the providential. This is turning point number 1. At the summit of Mount Moriah, when the ram appeared, it wasn't just a lucky break for Isaac. It was a cosmic signal. It was the moment God declared that for every death sentence human sin deserves, He has a divine substitute prepared. This shift moves the story from the fear of a demanding God to the awe of a providing God. It is the first aha moment of the journey, where we realize that the wood on the son's back was never meant for his own destruction, but to prove the Father's ultimate commitment to our rescue. This turning point echoes through the barley fields of Bethlehem as well. When Boaz speaks words of redemption to Ruth, the atmosphere of the entire story changes. The struggle for survival is suddenly eclipsed by the security of a covenant. This is a critical transition in our understanding. Redemption is not something earned through the sweat of the field. It is something granted by the grace of the kinsman. Ruth's status is transformed in an instant from an outsider to an heir. This shift is essential because it prepares the heart for the deeper mystery of the Messiah's lineage, showing that God's grace is wide enough to cover the gaps in our own history and strong enough to build a royal future out of a broken past. Even in the salt and darkness of Jonah's journey, the turning point serves as a spiritual anchor. The prayer from the belly of the fish represents the transition from rebellion to total dependence. It is the point where the runaway realizes that he cannot outrun the mercy of God. This moment of resurrection on the shore of Nineveh is a prophetic drumbeat, signaling that no depth is too great and no debt is too heavy for the Almighty to restore. These three turning points converge into a single truth. God is not just observing our stories. He is actively intervening to redirect our path toward the revelation that is coming next. The power of these turning points lies not just in their historical weight, but in their ability to become an emotional anchor for every soul watching today. When we see Isaac silent on the altar, we are not just looking at an ancient son. We are looking at every moment in our own lives where we have been asked to surrender what we love most to a God whose plan feels invisible. The turning point on Moriah whispers a profound promise that your greatest test is often the site of your greatest provision. This connection transforms the story from a distant memory into a living reality, anchoring your heart in the truth that God's hand is never more active than when the knife of circumstance is raised. Similarly, in the quiet desperation of Ruth, we find an anchor for our own seasons of loss and exile. Her turning point at the threshing floor is a reminder that no one is ever too far removed from the reach of the Redeemer. If you have ever worn a mask of success while feeling the hollow ache of spiritual poverty, Ruth's story becomes your own. It anchors you in the hope that a single act of humble faith can redirect an entire lineage from the dust of Moab to the glory of a king's house. The emotional shift here is vital. It moves us from being spectators of history to participants in a global restoration. Even Jonah's resurrection from the deep provides an anchor for those who feel they have outrun their second chances. His turning point is the ultimate proof that your failure is never the final word when mercy is involved. As these stories merge, they create a steady pulse of hope that prepares you for the deep insights ahead. We are no longer just looking at the what of these stories, but the who behind the patterns. This emotional grounding is the final step before we strip back the narrative to reveal the 3 layers of decoding that have been hidden beneath the surface for centuries. But behind the grand drama of altars, fields, and storms, there is a pulse that beats closer to your own heart than you might realize. This is the emotional anchor, the place where their ancient struggles meet your modern exhaustion. When we see Abraham walking up that mountain in a 3-day silence, we aren't just watching a patriarch. We are seeing every person who has ever had to trust God while their world was falling apart. We feel the weight of his every step, the cold grip of a knife that represented the death of his only hope. If you have ever stood in the middle of a crisis, holding on to a promise that felt like it was about to turn to ash, then Abraham's story is no longer history. It is your reflection. It is an anchor for your soul, reminding you that the silence of God is not the absence of God. In the same way, we find ourselves anchored in the humble determination of Ruth. She represents every soul that has ever felt like an outsider, every person who has started over with nothing but a desperate prayer and a fierce loyalty. When she gleans in the sun-scorched fields, we feel the ache in her back and the uncertainty in her heart. She is the anchor for those who are currently in a season of beginning again, proving that your background does not disqualify you from a royal future. Her emotional journey moves from the bitterness of loss to the security of a new name, anchoring us in the truth that grace does not just provide, it restores what was stolen. Even Jonah, in the cold darkness of the deep, anchors the hearts of those who feel they have run too far or failed too greatly. His cry from the belly of the fish is the universal cry of the human spirit at its breaking point. These stories are anchored in these raw, human moments to ensure that when we begin the deep decoding, your heart is already locked into the reality of the message. We are moving from the what to the why, but we do so with our feet firmly planted in the shared experience of these broken, yet redeemed lives. This emotional anchoring reaches its peak when we realize that the silence of these characters is often where God does his loudest work. Think of the moment Isaac lay on the wood, looking up at the sky, waiting for a blow that never came. That feeling of being suspended between a promise and a crisis is exactly where many of you find yourselves today. It is the anchor of trust. When the ram appeared, it wasn't just a solution for Abraham, it was a message to every generation that followed. Your extremity is God's opportunity. This connection is what transforms a dry theological study into a life-altering encounter. We feel the relief in Isaac's breath, and in that breath, we find the courage to face our own mountains, knowing that the provider is already there, waiting in the thicket. The anchor holds firm in the quiet dignity of Ruth's redemption as well. When she finally rests under the protection of Boaz, the emotional release is profound. It is the end of the striving and the beginning of the belonging. For anyone who has spent years trying to prove their worth or hide their past, this turning point is an anchor of unconditional acceptance. It tells you that the red thread of grace is stronger than the cords of your shame. And even in Jonah's case, the anchor is the staggering reality of a second chance. The smell of the sea, the grit of the sand on the shore, and the sudden light of a new day. These are the sensory anchors of mercy. As we close this chapter of the story retold, let these emotions settle into your spirit. We have walked the path, we have felt the tension, and we have anchored our hearts in the humanity of these ancient lives. But now, a new hunger begins to rise. We know what happened, and we have felt why it matters, but we have yet to see the mechanical precision of the mystery itself. The stories are over, but the revelation is just beginning. Prepare your mind, for we are about to transition from the heart to the code. We are moving from the experience of the story to the absolute, undeniable decoding of the divine patterns hidden within it. Now, we move beyond the veil of the narrative to decode the profound symbols that God has placed within these stories. To the untrained eye, these are merely props in an ancient play, but in the realm of the divine, every object is a word in a celestial language. We begin with the most startling symbol of all, the ram caught in the thicket. Why a ram? And why was it caught by its horns? In the ancient world, the horn represented strength and authority. By being caught by its horns in a thicket of thorns, the ram symbolized a majestic power that was voluntarily restrained. It was a physical echo of a king who would one day wear a crown of thorns, whose infinite strength would be bound for the sake of a substitute. When Isaac looked at that ram, he wasn't just seeing an animal, he was seeing the first decoded message of the great exchange. Then, we transition to the barley fields of Bethlehem to look at the sandal. In the story of Ruth and Boaz, the removal of a sandal was a legal seal, a public sign that a right of redemption had been transferred. But why a sandal? In Hebrew tradition, to set one's foot upon a land was to claim ownership. By handing over the sandal, the closer relative was admitting he could not walk the path of the Redeemer. Boaz, by accepting it, stepped into a debt he did not owe. This humble piece of leather becomes a symbol of the walk of grace, a reminder that our ultimate Redeemer would have to take on human feet and walk the dusty roads of our broken world to reclaim what we had lost. We must also confront the great fish of Jonah. Most people focus on the miracle of survival, but the symbol is far deeper. In the ancient mind, the depths of the sea represented Sheol, the abyss, the place of the dead. The fish was not a cage, it was a divine vessel of preservation. It symbolized the 3 days, a specific unit of prophetic time that marks the transition from death to life. These symbols, the ram, the sandal, the fish, are the first layer of the code. They are the visible anchors of an invisible truth, waiting for us to see the substance they have been shadowing for thousands of years. To unlock the second half of this symbolic layer, we must look at the elements of nature that God uses as his signature. Consider the light that broke over the horizon as Abraham and Isaac descended the mountain. In the biblical language, this is not just weather, it is the morning of grace. Every time light follows a moment of total surrender, it symbolizes the aha moment of divine revelation, a sign that the darkness of the law has been overcome by the brilliance of the promise. Then, we find the symbol of water in Jonah's abyss. Water represents both judgment and cleansing. Jonah was submerged in the water of judgment so that he could emerge into the life of a new mission. This duality of water foreshadows the very essence of baptism, the death of the old self and the resurrection of the new. We must also decode the hidden power within the names themselves. In the Hebrew context, a name is a destiny. When Boaz acts as the Goel, his name literally means, "In him is strength." He does not just provide, he embodies the strength required to bridge the gap between Moab's curse and Israel's blessing. And Isaac, whose name means laughter, represents the joy that comes after an impossible test. His life is a symbolic declaration that God's final word over humanity is not a cry of agony, but a song of triumph. These symbols, the light, the water, and the sacred names, are the divine fingerprints left on the fabric of history. They were placed there for you to find, thousands of years later, as proof that your life is not governed by chance, but by a master designer who speaks in the language of symbols. As we conclude this first layer of decoding, the ram, the sandal, the fish, and the light all point to a singular, overwhelming reality. We are moving from the objects to the actions. Prepare yourself for the next layer, where we decode the behavior, the hidden motives, and spiritual logic behind every move these ancient figures made. As we peel back the second layer of this divine mystery, we must look past the objects and focus on the behavior. Why did these men and women act with such strange, almost counterintuitive precision? Let us return to the mountain of Moriah and observe the silence of Isaac. Traditionally, we focus on Abraham's faith, but the behavior of the son is equally staggering. Isaac was not a small child. He was a strong young man, capable of carrying the wood for his own sacrifice up a steep incline. He could have easily resisted his aging father, yet he chose to lay down. Why? This behavior is the code for voluntary submission. It reveals that the heart of the sacrifice was not a forced execution, but a willing surrender. Isaac's silence decoded the future behavior of a Messiah who would stand before his accusers and open not his mouth. This was the first rehearsal of a strength that finds its power in letting go. Now, consider the behavior of Boaz at the city gate. When the closer relative refused to redeem Ruth because it might mar his own inheritance, Boaz did not hesitate. His behavior was not driven by profit, but by a radical commitment to the law of kindness. In the ancient legal context, Boaz was taking a massive social and financial risk. By decoding his willingness, we see the behavior of a kinsman who values the person over the property. This is the blueprint for a redeemer who would later leave a throne of glory to claim a bride who had nothing to offer but her loyalty. Even Jonah's flight to Tarshish, though seemingly a failure, carries a decoded message. His behavior of running away was not just a lack of courage. It was a desperate attempt to limit God's mercy to only those Jonah deemed worthy. By studying his resistance, we decode a profound truth about the human condition. We often flee from the very mercy we ourselves so desperately need. These actions, the silence of the son, the risk of the kinsman, and the flight of the prophet, are not random. They are the calculated steps of a divine choreography, showing us how the Spirit of God moves through human will to accomplish an eternal purpose. To complete the decoding of divine behavior, we must observe the active waiting that precedes every great miracle. Look at Ruth as she waited at the feet of Boaz in the darkness of the threshing floor. Her behavior was not passive. It was an act of strategic submission. She did not demand her rights. She positioned herself for mercy. By decoding this stillness, we see the pattern for every believer who has reached the end of their own strength. It is the behavior of entrusting the outcome, a profound realization that the Redeemer is more committed to the restoration than the person being restored. This silence at the threshing floor mirrors the silence of the tomb, where the greatest work in history was done while the world thought everything was over. Then, observe the behavior of Jonah after he was vomited onto the shore. His first action was to acknowledge the sovereignty of the God he tried to escape. He didn't argue. He began to walk toward Nineveh. This behavior of reluctant obedience is one of the most honest codes in the Bible. It reveals that God does not require us to be perfect or even enthusiastic to be used in his plan. He only requires our presence. By decoding Jonah's walk through the streets of his enemies, we see a shadow of the ultimate step of obedience, the movement toward a mission that feels impossible, yet is fueled by a divine mandate. Finally, consider the collective behavior of listening that permeates these stories. Abraham listened for the voice in the thicket. Ruth listened for the words of the kinsman. Jonah listened for the call in the depths. This behavior of spiritual attentiveness is the final key to this layer. It shows that the difference between a tragedy and a revelation is often found in the ability to hear a whisper in the middle of a storm. As we conclude this layer of behavior decoding, we see that every move made by these figures was a brushstroke in a much larger masterpiece. We are now ready to move from the actions to the hidden meanings, the third and deepest layer, where we discover the eternal principles that bind these stories to your life today. Now, we reach the deepest layer of the divine code, the hidden meaning beneath the surface. This is the part that almost everyone misses, yet it is the very heartbeat of the biblical mystery. We must ask, why did God weave these specific patterns across thousands of years? The hidden meaning of Isaac's sacrifice is not about a test of human nerves. It is a revelation of the prophetic pattern of substitution. Every detail, the 3-day journey, the wood on the back, the bound son, was a celestial map pointing to the exact coordinates of the cross. The hidden truth is that Isaac was not the primary focus. He was a shadow, a temporary placeholder for the true Lamb of God. This pattern proves that in the mind of the Almighty, the solution for humanity's debt was already decided before the problem ever began. Similarly, the hidden meaning in the story of Ruth and Boaz is the law of inclusion for the outsider. Most see a family drama, but the code reveals a revolutionary message. Grace is not limited by bloodlines or borders. By bringing a Moabitess into the lineage of the king, God was decoding his heart for all nations. The hidden logic here is that your past, your ethnicity, and your mistakes are not barriers to God's plan. They are often the very tools he uses to build his royal legacy. Even the strange silence of God during Jonah's descent into the deep carries a hidden weight. It reveals that judgment is never the final destination. It is a tunnel designed to lead to a new resurrection life. This layer of meaning moves the story from the pages of history into the sanctuary of your soul. It shows that the master designer is not just telling a story about ancient people. He is telling a story about his unwavering pursuit of you. The final key to the hidden meaning is found in the divine logic of sovereignty and grace. Many people look at the law of the high priest's death in the city of refuge and see only a strange, ancient legalism. But the hidden code reveals a staggering spiritual law. The debt of the guilty can only be satisfied by the life of the innocent. This is the aha moment, where we realize that God was not being arbitrary. He was establishing a precedent for the gospel. The death of the high priest was a small shadow of a cosmic transaction, where a king of infinite value would die to set a world of refugees free. This hidden pattern proves that there is a deeper truth beneath the surface of every biblical decree. Furthermore, we must decode the hidden pattern of the second chance. In the belly of the fish, Jonah discovered that God's grace is not a reward for the obedient, but a rescue for the broken. The hidden meaning of his 3 days in darkness is that even the grave can be turned into a womb for a new beginning. This pattern appears again and again from Isaac's release to Ruth's redemption, showing that God is the master of the U-turn. This is the spiritual logic that bridges the gap between ancient text and modern life. That your failures are never too deep for the reach of the master's hand. As we conclude this layer of hidden meanings, the ram, the sandal, and the fish all speak the same language. They tell us that the Bible is a perfectly interwoven tapestry, where every thread has a purpose and every color has a meaning. We have decoded the symbols, the behavior, and the hidden motives. Now, we are prepared for the final reveal of this chapter, the mini-climax. Prepare your heart for a disclosure that will change how you understand the entire story of redemption. Everything we have decoded so far, the sacrificial ram, the legal sandal, and the 3 days of Jonah, now converges into a single, breathtaking revelation. This is the moment where the shadow meets the substance in a way that defies all human coincidence. We must look at the exact geographical coordinates of these events. Mount Moriah, where Abraham raised the knife over Isaac, is the very same mountain range where, 2,000 years later, another father would sacrifice his only son. The thicket that caught the ram's horns was a prophetic mirror of the crown of thorns. This is the first mini-climax, the realization that the Bible is not just a book of stories, but a multi-dimensional map where time and space are woven together by a single hand. But the revelation doesn't stop with geography. It extends to the very essence of identity. When we look at Boaz as the kinsman redeemer, we see the leap. We have traveled from the dusty ruins of the Levant to the architectural precision of the temple, and from the harrowing heights of Mount Moriah to the suffocating depths of the Mediterranean Sea. What we have uncovered is not a collection of ancient myths, but a singular, divine signal, a red thread of redemption that has been woven through history with surgical accuracy. The final revelation is this: the Bible is not a book about human heroes. It is a meticulously engineered disclosure of a God who is obsessed with your rescue. When we look back at the ram in the thicket, the sandal of the kinsman, and the 3 days of Jonah, the picture is finally complete. We see that the great exchange was not a plan B. It was the blueprint of the universe. Every symbol we decoded and every behavior we analyzed was a deliberate shadow designed to prepare your mind for the substance. This is the moment of ultimate clarity, where the individual pieces of the puzzle vanish, leaving only the image of a master architect. The staggering precision of the geographical coordinates, the mathematical symmetry of the structures, and the theological harmony of the message all lead to one unavoidable conclusion. You are not looking at a product of human imagination. You are looking at a celestial transmission. If the arrival of a ram on a specific mountain could be timed to the very second to save a son, and if a pagan widow could be strategically placed in a royal lineage to change the world, then the chaos of your own life is not outside of his control. This is the first level of our conclusion, the transition from the history of them to the reality of you. The code has been broken, and the message is clear. The designer who wrote the stars is the same one who wrote these stories, and he is the same one who is currently writing yours. The realization that history is a deliberate design brings us to a critical turning point in our own journey. If the red thread is real, then your current season of struggle is not a sign of God's absence, but a part of his complex orchestration. We often feel like Jonah in the darkness, or like Ruth in a field that isn't ours, forgotten and exhausted. But the decoded patterns teach us that the waiting is never wasted. Just as the 3 days in the deep were necessary for Jonah's transformation, your period of uncertainty is the womb for your next revelation. The patterns we've explored are not just ancient curiosities. They are spiritual laws that govern the mechanics of your soul. When you face a Mount Moriah moment in your life, where you are asked to let go of what you love, you can now look at the code and see that a substitute is already in motion. The hidden layer of grace tells us that for every human end, there is a divine beginning, already prepared in the thicket. This is where the knowledge we have gained becomes power. It changes your perspective from one of fear to one of expectant trust. You no longer have to strive to earn your way out of the grain fields like a beggar. You can rest in the knowledge that you have a kinsman redeemer who has already settled the debt. The transition from understanding the mystery to living the mystery is the ultimate goal of this decoding process. We are shifting from being spectators of a divine drama to becoming active participants in it. The aha moments you've experienced over the past hour are designed to act as anchors. When the storms of life pull at you, these anchors of prophetic precision and historical evidence hold you firm. You are beginning to see that the world is not a collection of random accidents, but a structured environment where every shadow is carefully cast by a light that intends to find you. This journey of decoding has led us to one final, inescapable truth. The mystery of the Bible is not a secret to be kept, but a reality to be experienced. We have seen the evidence, we have analyzed the patterns, and we have felt the heartbeat of the designer. Now, the question is no longer whether the red thread exists, but whether you will allow it to pull you toward your own restoration. The stories of Abraham, Ruth, and Jonah were written to tell you that you are seen, you are known, and you are valued beyond measure. The master architect who precisely timed the arrival of the ram and the rising of the fish is the same, one who has brought you to this moment of clarity. Your life is the next chapter in this unfolding drama. The codes we have unlocked are meant to be the foundation for a new way of walking through the world, not in fear of the unknown, but in the confidence of the already provided. As we conclude, look back one last time at the shadows of the ancient world. See them for what they truly are, a love letter, written in the language of history, signed with the blood of the innocent, and delivered through the persistence of grace. The mystery is no longer hidden. The veil has been torn, and the light is pouring in. Thank you for walking this path of discovery with us. As you turn away from this screen and step back into the rhythm of your daily life, carry these decodings in your spirit. Remember the ram, the sandal, and the fish. Remember that you are part of a divine design that is far larger than your current circumstances. The red thread is in your hands now. Walk with purpose, live with hope, and never forget that the greatest mystery of the universe has always been God's relentless pursuit of your heart. The code is broken. The message is clear. Welcome to the story.
Live the truth with mercy. Carry hope without noise. And let the red thread pull you toward restoration.